Hello, boys and girls. This is Aunt Fernita, and I have a wonderful story for you called Caught in a Cave. Today's memory verse is from Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good." The message for today's story is we can do good even when others are not nice to us. Has anyone done something unkind to you? What did you do? David shows us how to do good to someone who is mean to us. The soldier scrambled down the mountainside. He slipped on some gravel, then he got his balance and ran on. "Saul and his soldiers are coming," he said to David. "King Saul is coming with thousands of soldiers." No longer a boy, David and his 600 men quickly climbed up into a big cave where they could hide. The cave was very dark and still. David and his men crouched behind big boulders or big rocks. They barely breathed. David and his men had been running away from King Saul and his soldiers for months. King Saul had made it known that he wanted to kill David. Why? Because King Saul was jealous of David's victories in battle. The people loved David. They even made up a song about him, comparing him to King Saul. And King Saul didn't like that one bit. Suddenly a man walked into the cave. A very tall, big man. It was Saul. The king turned and faced the entrance of the cave. He squatted down and pushed his robe out behind him. "Look," one of the hiding men whispered into David's ear. "The Lord is giving you a chance to kill King Saul." "I cannot," David replied, "for God has made him king. I cannot harm him." Then David took his sharp knife out of his belt. He crept slowly and without any sound toward King Saul. Then he reached out, cut off a piece of the king's robe. David crept back to his men. But then he began to feel bad about cutting the king's robe. When Saul stood up and left the cave, David followed him. "My lord, the king," he shouted. "My men and I could have killed you," David said, "but I will never hurt you because you were chosen by the Lord." "Look," David shouted as he held up the piece of material he had cut from the king's robe. "This proves that I could have hurt you." "Is that really you, David?" Saul called back. "You are a better man than I am," he said with tears running down his face. "You have been merciful. I know that you will surely be the king of Israel after me. Just promise me that you will not hurt my family." So King Saul and his 3,000 soldiers began the long trip back home. The Lord was happy with the way David treated Saul that day.
This podcast was brought to you by Gracelink.net and Studio El Piso. For more children's resources, please visit Gracelink.net.